2,800 years ago, a blind poet named Homer composed two of the greatest works Western civilization would ever know. Regarded as one of history's most influential authors, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey told the tales of Odysseus and Achilles, of Paris and Helen, names that would echo throughout the ages. Long ago, when monsters roamed the earth, a wealthy and powerful kingdom lay across the sea from the great cities of Athens and Sparta. This was Troy, renowned for its legendary walls, said to be indestructible, built by the gods themselves. The city was ruled by King Priam and Queen Hecuba, deeply loved and respected by their people. Priam, who had 50 sons and 50 daughters, saw his most admired child in Prince Hector, Troy's greatest warrior. As the eldest son, Hector was a brave and honorable fighter, second only to Achilles in combat. Devoted to his homeland and family, he loved none more than his wife Andromache and their son Astyanax, for whom he would sacrifice anything. Hector's sister Cassandra was the least fortunate of Priam's children. She once caught the eye of Apollo, who granted her the gift of prophecy in his attempt to win her affection. But when she rejected him, the god, enraged, cursed her. Though she would foresee the future, no one would ever believe her warnings. Then there was Paris, brother of Hector and Cassandra, raised away from his family. Before his birth, Hecuba received a prophecy foretelling that her unborn son would bring destruction to Troy. Unable to kill the child herself, she ordered a local shepherd to do so. But like Hecuba, the shepherd could not bring himself to harm the helpless infant, and instead raised Paris in secret, a choice that would alter history. Yet the shepherd's mercy alone would not fulfill the prophecy. For Troy to fall, another child needed to be born across the sea in Sparta. Zeus, king of the gods, fell in love with Queen Leda. Transforming into a magnificent swan, he lay with her, and soon she gave birth to 2 eggs. From them hatched 2 sons, Castor and Pollux, and 2 daughters, Clytemnestra and Helen. Helen would grow into the most beautiful woman in the world. When she came of age, nearly every man sought her hand in marriage. The greatest warriors, richest warlords, and princes of Greece traveled vast distances to reach Sparta. Among them were Odysseus of Ithaca, Agamemnon of Mycenae, and Ajax of Salamis, all offering themselves as suitors. Knowing her decision would lead to the rejection of many powerful men, Helen feared bloodshed would follow. To prevent conflict, Odysseus proposed that each suitor swear an oath to protect her chosen husband. With the threat of violence removed, Helen chose Prince Menelaus of Mycenae, and the two soon married, becoming king and queen of Sparta. Disappointed, the other suitors returned home peacefully, but they did not realize that their vow to defend King Menelaus, an oath meant to prevent war, would be the very thing that dragged them into one of the greatest conflicts the world had ever seen. Meanwhile, high on Mount Olympus, another wedding was taking place. The parents of Achilles, Thetis, the goddess of water, and Peleus, king of Phthia, were invited to Olympus to celebrate their marriage. Hosting a grand feast, they welcomed all the gods and heroes from across the land were invited to the wedding, except for one. Among all the gods, there was one universally disliked, Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, who brought chaos wherever she went. Offended by the exclusion, Eris decided to attend anyway, bringing with her a gift that would sow the seeds of conflict among the gods. The gift was a golden apple, inscribed with a simple phrase, "To the most beautiful." She threw the apple among the goddesses of Olympus, knowing their vanity would spark a dispute. Soon, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite were all fighting, each claiming the apple for herself. Unable to settle the matter, they turned to Zeus, but Zeus, unwilling to offend any of the goddesses, refused to judge. Instead, he placed the decision in the hands of a mortal, a shepherd known for his fairness in judgment. This man was none other than Prince Paris of Troy, who had been raised in exile as a shepherd. The 3 goddesses approached Paris, each offering him a reward in exchange for his favor. Hera promised to make him king of Europe and Asia. Athena offered unmatched skill in war, but Aphrodite, knowing his heart's deepest desire, vowed to give him the most beautiful woman in the world, an offer he could not refuse. Paris handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, who then instructed him to travel to Sparta. There, she would use her divine power to make Queen Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, fall in love with him. Following the goddess's instructions, Paris traveled to Sparta and met Helen, and the two quickly fell in love. Taking Helen's hand, Paris and his men fought through the ranks of Spartan guards sent to stop her abduction, but it was all in vain as the two boarded his ship and began the long voyage back to Troy. Upon their arrival, Paris was recognized by his father, King Priam, who welcomed him with open arms. Awed by Helen's beauty, the entire palace gathered to glimpse the new princess of Troy. However, amidst the excitement, two were deeply concerned about her arrival. Prince Hector, furious with his brother, warned Paris that his naive and lustful actions would bring war to Troy. While Hector's words were harsh, it was his sister, Cassandra, who had the worst reaction. She shrieked in despair, prophesying that Helen's arrival would lead to the fall of Troy itself. But, cursed by Apollo, no one believed her warnings. The royal guards dismissed her prophecies as madness and locked her deep within the palace. Back in Sparta, Menelaus returned from a funeral in Crete to the news that his wife, Helen, had been abducted. The ship she was on was headed for Troy. Enraged, Menelaus raised his armies to attack the Trojans, calling upon all of Helen's suitors to honor their oaths and join him in the conflict. True to their word, they answered his call, and soon the greatest warriors from across Greece, or the Achaeans as Homer would call them, were assembling to return Helen to Sparta. The first to join Menelaus was his brother, Agamemnon, the most powerful Greek king. Agamemnon ruled over Mycenae, an ally of Sparta with the wealthiest and largest army in Greece. When war came, it was Agamemnon who would command Greece's mighty fleet. Next, the suitors of Helen who had sworn their allegiance to defend Menelaus joined the cause, including Odysseus, Nestor, and Diomedes, all honoring their oath. Diomedes, the youngest of the Achaean kings, ruled over Argos, second only in power to Mycenae. A favorite of the goddess Athena, Diomedes was a skilled politician known for bringing wealth and stability to his people. Nestor, the king of Pylos, was the oldest of the Greek kings, having lived nearly 3 generations thanks to the blessings of Apollo. A former Argonaut, Nestor had traveled the world with Heracles, and now offered his years of wisdom and experience to Menelaus in his quest to retrieve Helen. The hardest to recruit was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the wisest and most cunning of the Greeks. Though he commanded great respect and power, Odysseus was reluctant to send his men to war. When Agamemnon's envoys came to recruit him, he feigned madness, mumbling and raving while plowing his fields with an ox and horse. The deception was quickly discovered when one of the soldiers placed Odysseus's son in front of the plow. With no choice but to stop, Odysseus picked up his son, revealing that he was of sound mind all along. Odysseus then raised his armies to send to Troy. Joining these powerful kings were the best warriors Greece had to offer: Achilles, Patroclus, and both Ajax the Greater and Ajax the Lesser, all answering the call. Achilles, Prince of Phthia, was the greatest warrior who ever lived, and with his support, victory in any conflict was assured. Achilles was invulnerable to attacks, and without him, the conquest of Troy would have been unthinkable. After his birth, his mother, the water goddess Thetis, took Achilles to the underworld and submerged him in the river Styx, whose waters granted immortality. However, as she held him by the heel, that part of his body remained untouched by the waters, making it the only vulnerable spot on his body. Growing up, Achilles was raised by the centaur Chiron, the teacher of Heracles. Under Chiron's tutelage, Achilles learned music, speechcraft, and warfare. While Achilles took great pride in his achievements, he was also cursed with a short temper, a flaw that led him into conflict throughout his life. During this time, Thetis learned of a prophecy that her son would have only 2 possible fates. Either he would live a long and peaceful life, dying as an old man without fame, or he would live a short and heroic life, dying a glorious death and becoming a legend. When word reached her that Greece's greatest warriors were gathering to attack Troy, Thetis did everything she could to protect her son. She dressed Achilles in female clothing and sent him to the island of Skyros, where he hid among the women. However, her plan took an unexpected turn. Diomedes, the one sent to recruit Achilles, was accompanied by none other than Odysseus, the wisest and most cunning of the Greeks. Upon realizing that Achilles was hiding on the island, Odysseus devised a plan to reveal him. He arrived with presents for the women and began distributing them. However, one particular gift, a set of armor, would excite one woman in particular, and Odysseus, seeing the opportunity, sounded a war horn. The women fled in panic except for one. Achilles swiftly removed his disguise, donned the armor, and readied himself for battle. His cover blown by the cunning plan, Achilles called for his lifelong friend Patroclus. The two of them joined Odysseus and Diomedes on the journey back to Sparta. With the greatest fighters from across Greece now assembled, Agamemnon commanded a mighty fleet of hundreds of ships. However, as they set sail for Troy, the fleet found itself unable to move. The waters had calmed and the ocean's winds had ceased. Agamemnon, having killed a sacred deer, had offended the goddess Artemis, who stole the winds in retaliation. Desperate to continue the journey, Agamemnon consulted a prophet who revealed that to restore the winds, Agamemnon would have to sacrifice the one he loved most, his eldest daughter, Iphigenia. With thousands of men waiting idle on their ships, Agamemnon's pride could not stand such a delay. He claimed that Achilles had wished to marry Iphigenia and lured her to his camp. When she arrived, eager for her wedding, she soon realized it was not a wedding altar she approached, but a sacrificial shrine. Her father plunged a dagger into her heart. With Iphigenia now dead at his feet, Agamemnon had appeased Artemis, who released the winds, allowing the fleet to set sail. It wouldn't be long before they reached the mighty city of Troy, but waiting for them was the greatest army Troy had to offer. Aeneas, the son of Aphrodite and cousin to Troy's royal family, joined the fight to protect his homeland. Troy would not face the Achaeans alone, as King Priam called upon his allies, the Lycians and the Amazons, to come to his aid. Lycia was led by Sarpedon, the son of Zeus and grandson of Bellerophon, along with Glaucus, a legendary warrior who would lead the Lycian armies into battle. They would fight alongside the fierce Amazons, warrior women led by Penthesilea, a daughter of Ares, who could fight better than almost any man. While both sides had the best warriors and leaders of their age, the gods too were divided. Hera and Athena, furious for not receiving the apple from Paris, chose to support the Achaeans. Aphrodite, having given Helen to the Trojans, chose to support them. Apollo, the patron of Troy, came to defend his city. Poseidon, jealous that the Trojans worshipped Apollo rather than him, decided to join the Achaeans. Lastly, Ares, lured by the promise of battle and wanting to best his sister Athena, sided with the Trojans to cause as much bloodshed as possible. For 9 long years, the Achaeans attacked Troy with wave after wave, but the city's impenetrable walls held strong. With resources running short, Achilles led Greece's armies south, searching for supplies, gold, and women. They first took the island of Lesbos before landing on the shores of Asia Minor, pillaging the towns and cities they came across. As they made their way back to Troy, from the cities of Leonasus and Hippoplasia, the Greeks took many beautiful women as slaves. Briseis was awarded to Achilles, and Chryseis to Agamemnon, 2 women who would change the course of the war. The sight of armor excited one woman in particular, prompting Odysseus to seize the opportunity. He sounded a war horn, causing the women to scatter in panic, except for one. Achilles, now exposed, swiftly shed his disguise, donned the armor, and prepared for battle. Realizing his cover was blown, he called upon his lifelong friend Patroclus, and together they joined Odysseus and Diomedes for the journey back to Sparta. Now that the greatest warriors from across Greece were assembled, Agamemnon commanded a powerful fleet of hundreds of ships. However, as they sailed toward Troy, they found themselves stuck, unable to move. The winds had calmed, and the waters were still. Agamemnon had offended the goddess Artemis by killing a sacred deer, and in retribution, Artemis had stolen the winds. Desperate to proceed, Agamemnon consulted a prophet who revealed that the only way to restore the winds was to sacrifice his dearest, his eldest daughter, Iphigenia. With thousands of men idly waiting on their ships, Agamemnon's pride could not bear the delay. Claiming that Achilles had desired Iphigenia's hand in marriage, Agamemnon lured her to his camp. Upon her arrival, eager for her wedding, Iphigenia soon realized that it was not a wedding altar she approached, but a sacrificial shrine. Her father struck her down, dagger in hand. With his daughter's life now taken, Agamemnon had appeased Artemis, and the winds returned, allowing the fleet to set sail once more. The fleet soon reached the mighty city of Troy, where the greatest warriors awaited them. Aeneas, son of Aphrodite and cousin to the royal family, joined the defense of his homeland. Troy would not stand alone, as King Priam called upon his allies, the Lycians and the Amazons. Lycia was led by Sarpedon, son of Zeus and Glaucus, a legendary warrior who would command the Lycian armies. They would fight alongside the fierce Amazons, warrior women led by Penthesilea, a daughter of Ares, whose prowess in battle rivaled any man. The gods were divided by the conflict. Hera and Athena, still furious at not receiving the apple from Paris, sided with the Achaeans. Aphrodite, who had gifted Helen to the Trojans, threw her support behind them. Apollo, the patron god of Troy, defended the city. Poseidon, angered that the Trojans worshipped Apollo over him, joined the Achaeans. Ares, driven by his love of battle and a desire to best his sister Athena, sided with the Trojans, eager to fuel the bloodshed. For 9 long years, the Achaeans launched wave after wave of attacks on Troy, but the city's impenetrable walls held strong. As resources began to dwindle, Achilles led the Greek forces southward, seeking supplies, gold, and women. They first raided the island of Lesbos before landing in Asia Minor, pillaging towns and cities along the way. On their journey back to Troy, the Greeks captured many beautiful women as slaves, including Briseis, awarded to Achilles, and Chryseis, claimed by Agamemnon, two women who would alter the course of the war. Agamemnon fell deeply in love with Chryseis, but her father, a priest of Apollo, was furious that his daughter had been taken as a slave. He traveled to Agamemnon's camp, offering gold and silver in exchange for her release. However, Agamemnon rejected the offer, taunting the priest by pointing at Chryseis chained to his bed. Apollo, enraged by the treatment of his priest, sent a plague of arrows to ravage the Greek armies, refusing to relent until Chryseis was returned. Left with no choice, Agamemnon agreed to let her go. Odysseus was sent to reunite Chryseis with her father. With his concubine now gone, Agamemnon turned to Briseis, the slave girl of Achilles. If he had to go without his prize, so too would his greatest warrior. Stealing her from Achilles' tent, Agamemnon declared Briseis his own. Achilles, enraged, demanded her return, but Agamemnon only mocked him. In frustration, Achilles drew his sword, but the goddess Athena appeared from the heavens, holding his arm in place and warning him against such an impulsive action. Heeding Athena's advice, Achilles put down his sword, but refused to serve a king who had treated him with such disrespect. He returned to his tent, leaving the Greek armies to fight on without his help. For a time, the Greeks managed to fight without Achilles, though the losses on both sides began to take their toll. In an attempt to end the war with no more bloodshed, Paris and Menelaus agreed to a duel, with the victor being declared Helen's true husband. The two men faced each other while warriors from both sides anxiously watched. As their swords clashed, Menelaus struck Paris, knocking him to the ground. Just as Menelaus was about to deliver the final blow, Aphrodite, who had a fondness for Paris, intervened. She appeared above them, lifting Paris's weak body and taking him back to his chamber, where Helen awaited. Paris, relieved to be alive, clung to Helen's robes, tears in his eyes, grateful to be with her again. However, Helen, having watched the battle from her window, was unimpressed by Paris's humiliation. His failure to stand his ground caused her love for him to wane. Hector, deeply embarrassed by his brother's failure, knew the war would continue. He went to bid his family farewell, with his wife and son crying in his arms, knowing this might be the last time he would see them. But for Troy to survive, he had no choice but to fight. Emerging from the mighty walls of Troy, Hector rallied his men, pushing the Greeks back to their ships. Without Achilles' support, the Greeks were no match for him. However, even as the Greeks neared defeat, with his men dying around him, Achilles refused to join the fight. Taking matters into his own hands, his best friend Patroclus donned Achilles' iconic armor and charged into battle. With it appearing that Achilles had rejoined the fight, fear swept through the Trojan forces, who began to flee back to the safety of the city's walls. Seeing his army crumbling before him, Hector would decide to make a final stand, turning to face Patroclus to save as many of his men as possible. Charging towards him with his sword in hand, he would take one swift blow, striking Patroclus dead. Shocked at the ease with which Greece's finest warrior had been defeated, Hector would crouch down to remove Achilles' helmet. But when Patroclus's face was uncovered, he realized he had not defeated Achilles at all. Seeing the death of Patroclus, the Greek armies would rush to claim his body, fighting off the Trojans as they went, bringing him back to their camp. Achilles would be distraught when he saw his best friend lying dead before him, contemplating ending his own life. Achilles could not hold back his anguish, with his mother Thetis coming to comfort him. Seeing her son in such distress, Thetis would go to Olympus and retrieve a new set of armor from the forge of Hephaestus. Placing it on Achilles when she returned, with his new armor equipped, the grief Achilles had felt would now turn to revenge, with the destruction of Hector and Troy the only things on his mind. Seeing the real Achilles now charging towards him, Hector would begin to run in fear, with him being chased around Troy's walls 3 times before he was eventually caught. Unable to run any further, Hector decided to make a final stand and fight Achilles with honor. Charging at him, Hector would draw his sword, but as he took his final swing, it would miss, with him falling down to the floor. Realizing the end was near, Hector would refuse to beg for his life, and instead would only request and thing that Achilles treat his body with respect so his family could properly mourn his passing. But still enraged at the death of Patroclus, Achilles would plunge his spear into Hector's neck, bringing an end to his life. Tying Hector's legs to the back of his chariot, Achilles would drag his corpse. around the city, parading his body for all to see while Hector's entire family watched from the walls above. It was a sight too much for Hector's father, King Priam, to bear. As nightfall came, Priam would approach Achilles in his camp, begging at his feet for his son's body to be returned. Moved by the king's words, which reminded him of his own grief after the death of Patroclus, Achilles would give in and allow Priam to take Hector's body. Arriving back in Troy, the entire city would gather to see Priam's son, mourning for the loss of their great hero, but none would feel the pain more than Hector's wife Andromache and his son Astyanax, who clung onto his body as it passed through Troy's somber streets. With Hector's death, Homer would mark the end of the Iliad, but for the story of Troy, more tragedy was to come. With Hector now gone, all hope was lost within the city, and with Achilles closing in, it looked like the end was near. Slaughtering the Trojans one by one, he would make his way to the gates of Troy, but as he went to scale the city walls, he would feel a sharp and excruciating pain in his heel, for Paris, guided by the god Apollo, had shot Achilles with a poisoned arrow in the only mortal part of his body. Dropping to the floor, with poison coursing through his veins, Achilles' skin would turn white as snow, with him taking his last and final breath. But Paris would not live long enough to enjoy his victory, for the Greeks, who had seen him shoot Achilles, would hunt him down and take their revenge. With their greatest heroes now gone, each side would fall into despair, especially the Greeks, who saw no way to penetrate Troy's great walls without the strength of Achilles. But there would be one Greek who did not give up hope, Odysseus, devising a cunning plan, a plan so genius that its story would echo throughout the ages. Constructing a giant wooden horse, Odysseus would hollow out the inside, making enough room for himself and a handful of Greece's best warriors to be hidden within. And so, when the next day dawned, the Trojans awoke to find a great horse outside their walls. Seeing the Greek camp dismantled and their ships sailing off into the horizon, a great cheer erupted throughout the city, celebrating that the war had come to an end. Mesmerized by its beauty and believing the horse to be a peace offering, the Trojans would decide to bring it within their walls. But there was one who was not fooled by the gift. Cassandra, claiming it was a trap, would urge the Trojans to burn the horse. But once again, she was ignored, with the entire city laughing and ridiculing her for her insanity. The Trojans ignored Cassandra's warning, but that night, when everyone was asleep, Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, and Ajax began to climb out of the horse. They killed the guards, opened the gates from the inside, and signaled with fire for the rest of the Greek fleet to return. The Trojans woke up to see their city burning, and Greek warriors flooding through the streets, looting homes, and killing anyone left to defend. As Troy burned, King Priam of Troy met his end when Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles, stabbed him in his defenseless body. After leaving the king's body among his fallen men, Pyrrhus went to the royal chambers. There he found Hector's wife and son. He took the infant Astyanax and threw him from the city walls to his death, before taking Hector's wife Andromache into slavery to be his concubine. After 10 long years of war, Troy's famous walls were finally breached. With its king dead and its heroes defeated, Troy was now at the mercy of the Greeks. Cassandra, fleeing through the streets, found refuge in the temple of Athena, watching in fear as her fellow citizens were killed. But Ajax the Lesser found her hiding and entered the temple. He violated her in front of Athena's statue. Angered by the disrespect in her sacred temple, Athena struck Ajax's ship with lightning as he left, causing him to fall into the sea. Poseidon dragged him to a watery grave. For Cassandra, things got worse. With Ajax gone, Agamemnon claimed her as his concubine and took her back to Mycenae. But Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, was furious at her husband for lying with another woman. In a jealous rage, she grabbed an axe and killed Cassandra. Clytemnestra's anger didn't stop with Cassandra. She had never forgiven Agamemnon for sacrificing their daughter, Iphigenia, to calm the winds. Now, Clytemnestra took her revenge. Waiting until Agamemnon was asleep, she sneaked into his room and stabbed him in the heart, giving him the same brutal death he had given to their daughter. Of the few Trojans who survived, Aeneas was the most important. He led a small group of survivors out of the burning city. They traveled across the Mediterranean, eventually landing in Italy, where they began a new life. Aeneas's descendants, Romulus and Remus, would go on to found the city of Rome. Finally reunited with Helen, Menelaus returned to Sparta, where they ruled as king and queen again. When their time came, they passed on to the afterlife, living together for eternity on the Isle of the Blessed. However, for one hero, Odysseus, the journey was far from over. The most clever of the Greeks would face a long, dangerous journey that would take him 10 more years to complete.